Lowcountry Money Talk. Phil Bloyd returns here at the desk. It's
Yes,
always nice to see you.
It's good to see you.
Love having you in the studio.
All right.
Learned so much from you.
Thank you.
And our viewers, I know, have a lot of questions about retirement. They're either entering in retirement, planning for, or currently retired, and have questions about that. So we're kind of just following up from where we left off before the break and talking about what we potentially could stand to lose in retirement as we're taking out funds.
Yeah.
We don't want to spend too much in taxes. We don't want to take from the wrong category. So you've discussed on this show, Phil, the idea of buckets, and I'd love for you to just walk us through these buckets and what we should be doing.
Sure. Jessa, so let's go back to financial planning versus retirement planning. So retirement planning focuses on withdrawals or income. So we saved all this time, we've accumulated all this wealth. Now, where do I take my money out? A lot of times people just panic and they'll just say, okay, I'm going to take $15,000 out of my IRA. And I'm like, okay, if we take $15,000 out of your IRA, I may need to go ahead and withhold $3,000 more in tax. And they're like, I'm like, that's $18,000 then. And they're like, oh. I'm like, look, how much do you have in your checking and savings? Oh, I've got $150,000 in my checking and savings. I'm like, why? Well, I'm comfortable.
Right.
I'm like, I'll bet you are, but you know, we are not doing required minimum distribution maybe because you're not 73 yet. You've already paid taxes on that $150,000. I'm like, take the 15 out of the 150 because you got way too much. We only want 6 months expenses in the emergency fund,
that's
right?
That's some emergency.
Yeah, I'm like, the way I read your tax return, that's way over your expenses, right? So maybe we take it from that bucket because you've kind of already settled the taxes on there. The other thing we may want to look at is we have a capital gains bucket. So in the capital gains bucket, that may be up to 15% or more in income tax, but it could be zero.
I see, yeah.
So the first thing I want to do when a client says, and it's automatic for me, so they would call in and they would talk to one of my assistants, and then on my note on my desk says we need to do a $15,000 from this account. The thing I'm going to do is I'm automatically going to review.
Right. You're not just going to go ahead and
No.
Okay, right.
No.
Move it over.
And even they maybe said, okay, take this out of my IRA, then I'll make a phone call and I'll say, this is why we don't want to take it out of your IRA. And they're, oh yeah. Or a gift to the child. I'm doing some gifting. You know, I need to give my kid $10,000. I said, okay, I'll do a withdrawal for 12. And they're like, Phil, I said 10. I said, yeah, but the IRS said 12.
You got to pay the taxes
So
on it. Yeah.
they're like, well, that kid doesn't really need that gift anyway, you know. So we're going to rethink that a bit. So it depends on what buckets we're taking those withdrawals from.
Yeah, and it's so nice that you have your eye on that because, gosh, you can lose a lot of money taking it from the wrong bucket, and we don't always think about that. We're seeing the total and we're making decisions. Okay, so I think we have time to talk about our next topic here, which is chasing high returns. So of course, if you're invested in the market, it is so tempting to really seek that high risk, high reward. But let's talk a little bit about why that might not always be the best plan.
Well, Jessa, I see a lot of times that our retirees or soon-to-be retirees, they're willing to take the risk. So I'm going to go over some reviews with them and say, well, this is the risk we need to take. Are we okay with that? And they're like, yes. But when they come to me, they're used to going to an advisor, and maybe the advisor said, they go and say, hey, I need a higher return in my market. My market's not producing enough return for me. So the advisor might say, well, bring me some more money. Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to analyze those equity holdings to see if they're at least performing average.
Yes.
And a lot of times they're not.
Right.
So I'm like, well, wait a minute. Before we start throwing a bunch more money in this particular, maybe this hole, we better see if we're at least getting the average returns.
Right.
And I'm like, well, wait a minute. If we got at least average returns, I don't think maybe we need to put more money in there. So let's get that fixed first.
Take what you've got.
Let's get at least average before we start taking more risk.
And that's one thing that I've learned from you, which, you know, especially when the market was really good there for several years, is people were just so excited to be up that they weren't even really concerned with whether or not they were outpacing the average. So important there. If you want to just see where you're at, have Phil and his team take a good look at your financial portfolio and your plan. They do something called a revolutionary wealth review. It is eye-opening and it is really helpful to just have them go through. What you do to set that up is you call Rachel over at the office. She'll get you set up for that, and Phil and his team will take great care of you. So we'll be back with more here on Lowcountry Money Talk. Stick with us.